You're listening to the uMentor talk show, now available on the Umoja app. I'm your host, Imran Dharamsi, and on this weekly talk show, we invite professionals and teenagers to take us through their journeys and give us advice. Remember, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can always leave them on the Inspire app, or you can reach out to the panelists given the information that they give in the show itself. And so before we start, we wanted to mention a bit about the Inspire platform, which is a question and answer platform for career advice in our Shia community. So if you've never heard about this, you should know that as a rising professional, you can ask for great advice from other professionals in our community. And as a mentor, you can give advice to our community's future professionals. And that is available if you download the Umoja app and make an account on Android and iOS. That's how you can get access to that. And then one other thing, we are able to share stories of inspiring professionals, students, and community organizations only because of the generous support of viewers and listeners like you. So please help us keep the mic on and consider supporting us at mojarch.org/donate or in the Umoja app. Thank you. Now on to the main part, obviously, today's speaker. Today's speaker is Dr. Hossein Jarrahi, who is an associate professor at the UNC School of Information and Library Science. He completed his undergraduate studies in public administration in Iran, where he also worked on web development as a side passion. And then after that, he pursued the field of information systems, which lies at the intersections of organizations and technology at the London School of Economics. Currently, he researches and teaches about the role of information technology in organizational contexts. And his most recent research is examining the adoption of artificial intelligence in shaping knowledge-based work practices. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about his research and what he does exactly, and also the day-to-day of academia and all of that. So let's welcome Dr. Jarrahi on the show. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Jarrahi. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.
So I know I read a little bit about your background, but just for maybe people who don't know what those fields are that I was talking about, like public administration and information systems, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. So public administration concerns management of organizations in public sector. So
Mm-hmm.
it focuses a lot on concepts of organization behavior, organization design, and just basic management concepts. Information systems is when the concept of organizing management gets combined with the understanding of technology.
Okay.
In particular, how information technology can be used, how the strategic power of this technology can be harnessed for organizational ends,
Hmm.
and how we can, because information technology is a complicated technology and is increasingly shaping our personal and professional lives.
And so you did your undergrad in public administration, and then what drew you to then pursue graduate studies in information systems as opposed to just continuing on like the government path?
So as you noted, I was working on web design, web development quite
Yeah.
early in 2000s. And I wanted to see how I can combine these two passions. I was sure that I don't want to go into like purely technical field like computer
Okay.
science or computer engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and I was more interested in the application. But I was basically playing with the technology and application in organizational context. So that brought me to information systems.
Got it. Okay. Um, could you maybe give us a little bit of a better idea of some of the concepts in the field of information systems? I know we were talking about the fact that social media algorithms just keep feeding you the same stuff as what you're interested in. So if you could just maybe talk a little bit more about that, just so we get an idea of what kind of things you study.
Sure. So my research is organizationally and work focused.
Mm-hmm.
That's where most of information system research was 30, 40 years ago,
Okay.
because only bigger organizations like IBM or US Navy of the world could afford those
Mm-hmm.
technologies. Now, everyone, when you wake up, you have your iPhone in your hand, probably when
Right.
you go
Yeah.
to sleep, you have it by your bed, and in between you, most of your information comes, professional, personal, comes from the digital environment. How you
Hmm.
interact with this uh, massive influx of information, how you use multiple forms of technology, whether they're like tangible, like iPhone, or intangible, like social media, or artificial intelligence, which is another research interest of mine, algorithms. That is complicated. In my research, I want to know how people make most of these technology, or how their work, how their life might be hampered, because there are a lot of really unintended, consequences to these
Yeah.
tools and their application in our life and our organizations.
Hmm. Got it. Okay. We didn't really talk about this in the pre-interview, but I feel like maybe we should discuss it. Can you talk about what your graduate school process was like?
So the I went to two different graduate schools. One was in London, the other one was in the U.S. London was Masters in Information System. The other one was the Information Science and Technology in the U.S. They were a
Okay.
little bit different, but the experience, I think, was how it was different from an undergraduate, study. It was more theoretical. It was more driven by research ideas, research problems, and
Mhm.
just more student driven. I mean, those of
Okay.
us who have gone through, graduate and undergraduate studies, you can tell. Um, the pillar of undergraduate study is lectures. You sit
Yeah.
in lectures, and a lot
Mhm.
of it is driven by professors and instructors. So my experience was very self-driven, and I mean that was actually a big motivation for me to stay in academia.
Hmm. Got it. So you got your master's and then your PhD. How many years did that take?
Oh, that was long. So masters in the UK is 1 full year. In the US, my PhD took quite a long time. It was like, and I changed university because my advisor moved.
Oh,
So I think in total it was 6 years. In
got
total,
it.
the PhD was 6 years.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Cool. Um, we were also talking about specifically academia versus research. Sorry, academia versus industry. So, could you describe a little bit of what does your day to day look like in academia, and then we'll talk a little bit more about industry.
So I have a lot of flexibility. I certain aspects of my work life, my schedule is a structure, and those are typically teaching and service oriented activities where I have to attend meetings. For the most part, are classes that I got to attend, and the rest of it is just pretty open.
Hmm.
So I wake up in the morning. I mean, that's the timing of it. I pretty cherish that I have control over it.
Hmm.
The days I can teach, the time that I can teach, I have some control over it, not total control.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is just me figuring out these big projects, working towards them. The projects sometimes pan out in years, and just making sure I spend enough time on these research projects, and just be driven. That doesn't mean that one thing I want to emphasize is it's not solitary work. We collaborate a lot,
Okay.
and those
Hmm.
collaboration brings another interesting dimension to it, which comes with responsibility, meetings, and other constraints.
Hmm. And then so you talked about the flexibility. Um, Initially, when you said flexibility, I thought that was generally positive, but then you said it's a double-edged sword. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually study some of that flexibility as a
Oh,
dimension
okay.
in the future of work. So the benefits are quite clear, I think, for your audience. You can work from different places. You might be traveling.
Hmm.
We're not tied to a specific location. That's what we call a spatial flexibility, temporal. You don't need to be 9 to 5 specifically. But the potential downside of it, you don't know where your day uh,
Right.
ends and where it starts. By day, I mean work day, and you got to be
Hmm.
very careful about conflation of personal life and work. and making sure that
Mhm.
that the work doesn't take over your personal life.
And how do you maintain the work life balance? Because I'm sure it's easy for the all the meetings and things to just bleed into your home life.
I mean, that's hard. I'm not really proud of any routines there, but at least I try, I mean, to have some temporal structure, like over the weekend, try to
Mm,
spend time with my family. I would travel, and I make sure that I won't, I tell people that I'm traveling if it's for leisure, for family. You just tell other people because, and I think this is not just about academia. Some of the things that we are dealing with are norms. If you
right.
reply back to emails after 30 minutes or like 10 p.m., people would expect that. That becomes an emerging expectation over these digital media.
Mm,
You tell them, I'm not. I work like with this professor that I know if I send an email on Friday, she's gonna reply back on Monday. That is the. She never talked about this, but this is what happens, and
mm,
you develop that expectation.
mm.
So some
Okay.
of it is just your own conscious norms and practices.
Um, I was just thinking, as someone who studies work and organizations, this must be very meta for you to talk about your own work and like the mechanics behind it. um, okay. I feel like maybe a lot of our listeners are never have really considered a career in academia before or don't really know what it's about. So could we talk a little bit about like skills and goals? So specifically, what skills do you need to have to be a successful academic? And then what are the goals in academia? Because they're pretty different from the ones that you would have if you're working at a company in industry.
The This is quite again meta and abstract. The primary goal is contributing to the current state of research and knowledge. Now, that if I want to make it more specific, there are three jobs in research based in big universities.
Hmm.
The main duties: number one, research, teaching, and then number three is service. Service means to the university, to the students. That's different than teaching.
Okay.
Advising PhD students,
Hmm.
and reviewing, serving on review panels and things like that
Got
counts
it.
as service. So
Okay.
that those are, and the order shows the importance of that order is intentional: research, teaching, and service. Service
As
is
in research is the most, and then
in research based university, like the first 100 university in the US
hmm.
specifically, research takes over. So you basically research, you develop new knowledge, you try to convey it to students, teach that to the students, and provide service to the community at large, academic community to be more specific, inside and outside of the university. So a lot of it is just constantly being curious about questions and trying to answer defining questions. Some of those questions are
Hmm.
defined by you. The question itself should be smart, and trying to answer those questions, actually we call them research questions, we have a name for them. And then trying to we have to write a lot. Still the main mode of delivery to the research community is writing, not doing podcasts. Those are peripheral type of activities. But writing a lot of papers, articles, going through peer reviews, that is invisible work we do, sometimes years of peer
Hmm.
review, people reading our article, reviewing them, and trying to revise them and get them published. So we've got something that is called publish or perish in academia, which means we got to publish constantly.
Got it. Okay. So that's like your main goal, like the main incentive.
In terms of dissemination of your research, is publishing and getting grants to support your lab, your students, and yourself to some. And research activities sometimes are expensive.
Right. Okay. And then how is the mindset in academia different from the one that's in industry? Because maybe some people who are in undergrad, they're trying to decide where to go, including myself, obviously, but for other people even out there.
That's an interesting question, and I mean, it's hard to answer that because industry itself is not very homogeneous. Because
Okay. Yeah.
some industrial work is very research center. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest difference is things in outside of academia are very mission centered.
Hmm.
Specific projects, deliverables, and those are geared towards very specific needs, customer, clients, and services. In academia, things are not that driven by immediate needs or some, I mean, the stakeholders, we still have stakeholders, people that we're
Right.
trying to serve. That's public, that's the research community.
Hmm.
But things are, I would say, much more abstract, theory oriented in a sense that you are not driven by immediate goals like that or immediate projects. Um, so I would say, I mean, that's hard to generalize across the board, but work in academia is less structured. And
Got
if
it.
you're very passionate about pursuing questions, understanding the world around you, however you define it, if you're a chemical engineer, your world is very different from a medical researcher or a sociologist or anthropologist. If you're curious about these questions, academia is the place um, to pursue.
Okay. Thank you. Um, and then the other thing we were talking about is the idea of tenure. So for our listeners who maybe don't haven't heard that word before, what is tenure in academia?
So I think that's more of a U.S. concept.
Yeah.
That concept is it comes in different shapes and forms in other countries. In the U.S., tenure means after typically 6 years of your service, your work, you're being assessed in a very comprehensive manner,
Hmm.
and the university will make a decision, and that decision can be either they keep you or you gotta leave. Um, and that happens all the time. People,
Hmm.
so it's not like you can continue.
Right.
But once you're given tenure, you're promoted, and from that point on, that's a turning point. You become an associate professor from the rank of assistant professor.
Hmm.
But also, you get, I think, a quite interesting and solid job security, which is kind of missing elsewhere in the U.S. in the
Yes.
job market. So
Right.
it's hard to fire you unless you do something crazy. Um, and you're much more secure after the tenure.
Hmm. Got it. Okay. Um, how about the skills that you need to go into academia? So I would imagine with all this, because of how long the training is, you need to be quite persistent for one. So
Yeah.
what are some of the other skills that someone who is going to academia or thinking of it should assess themselves and ask themselves, do I have this skill?
So, I mean, some of it is just the same skills that you nurture and you need to work in any other professional settings. Any other
Mm,
professional setting, you got to be very persistent. But I
right.
think you got to be very self motivated about the work you're doing because of everything I said. You don't have much of a structure. You have to be
Mm,
the main driving. You're basically your one thing I truly enjoy, and that can not be really good for certain people. Your own boss. So in that sense, we share some, not exactly the same type of habits or criteria with entrepreneurs.
mm,
um,
okay.
the paycheck is the big difference, but also you are your own boss. I mean, typically you define what you want to do. A lot of your research projects are your passion, not the passion of your managers. We do not have those typical managers. The
Right.
hierarchy does not work that way.
Hmm.
uh, for that reason, you got to be very self-motivated. You got to be very persistent. For years you got to work on some problems, and you got to be really passionate about those problems. But the same type of skills that you really need, like peer skills, you got to work with a lot of different people. I mean, the first
Mm,
group of people are students. You should be a good teacher for the most part.
hmm.
You should be able to convey concepts, some of these really complicated concept and research ideas to your students, undergraduates. And you got to work with research teams, administrative people, people from other universities. So it takes similar type of skills in many, I mean, in a similar fashion. But I think you got to be, one thing I want to emphasize is persistent and being self-motivated.
Okay, got it. Okay, I have one or two more personal questions for you, and then I want to zoom out a little bit for some more general advice. So for you personally, what has been the most interesting experience that you've had over your time as a professor?
I think we are different from industrial researchers people because in our field a lot of PhDs go to research labs like Google or like
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft, Facebook. Um, one I think plus that we have again above those types of position is being able to work with the students and seeing how they grow over the years. I started teaching in 2013, so some of these students in my 2013 class now they are managers,
Hmm.
and I it's quite interesting to see this evolution and how we've been able to help them. And what I mean, the help is not just, I think, giving them concepts or working on specific content or techniques. But I think one thing you can gain from a 4 year education is self confidence, being able to present yourself, being able to shape an identity. Um, and that really shapes your future career. I mean, that put you on this. And that's one of the reason people who go to university to higher education, they have a better. It's not just about brands of Brown or I don't know Duke. It's
Yeah.
also about learning some of these skills, working with other students, serving on um, you know campus organizations as leaders, and being able to connect to an extensive network of recent or previous graduates. So one of my major um, experiences, one of the most positive experiences, is just being connected with the body of students who have
Okay.
graduated in the past.
Okay, thank you. And that actually flows very well into the next point that I wanted to talk about, which is what would be your message to students right now who are thinking about what they want to do and going through kind of the experimentation phase? I know you had some interesting things about that. What would you tell them about like short term versus long term perspective?
That's a good question. So I think just the broad message I want to share tonight
Hmm.
is um, always a long-term perspective helps, and that's
Okay.
hard because you're young, you're only in your 20s, and it's hard to get that long-term perspective. But you can always decide if you're given two routes and two options. For example, two job offers, two internship opportunities.
Right.
Which one is gonna only help you in short term? I mean, one of
Mm.
the biggest help, which is important, is financial incentives, right?
Mm.
But that shouldn't be the only driving factors because that's not the only thing that gives you the edge over long term. You're entering this, massive job market. You're competing in a global scales with other folks, and gaining skills, gaining perspectives that help you over long term is a much more important thing to do. Um, and as I noted, you're young, but you can connect yourself with people who are able to mentor you. Programs like this, I mean, these are
Hmm.
really helpful. You don't need to go through to exactly the same experience to learn their insight. Um, so being smart, listening to people, and just as I noted earlier, having smart people in your network. And smart doesn't mean that people who can crunch numbers or tell you what is the best ETF to invest tomorrow. Um, People who can see you as one person, like give you
Mm.
insight about because a lot of things we hear, unfortunately, in America are about really sacrificing everything for your career. And when you get to age of 40, 50, that might be too late. You're on a path that is irreversible. And I mean, my philosophy is always, you need to have a holistic perspective, which is personal life, your family,
Right.
your new family, and all of that into
Mm.
consideration. And that comes with a balance. Always a holistic perspective means this balance. Um, One of the things you learn over the course of your career is one-sided or what we call one-trick ponies that are very good in one aspect of their life, but when you look at their life in a holistic manner, and unfortunately, some of them are presented as role models. Um, the richest people in our country,
Right.
or the most successful people in industry, academia, they're
Mm.
not necessarily the most balanced people.
Right. Yeah. So the balance is
The
like
balance
key.
with, yeah, and surrounding yourself by people who give you that balance. Not like
Mm.
I had this conversation with some of my friends in Silicon Valley, and they said they left because they were aware of these dynamics, and they said that all of the conversation in bars and social gatherings were about how to get funding, how to move on to the next
Mm.
venture. That was too much. That's and
Right.
they had seen really bad consequence, like real health consequence of those types of objectives. Really, I would say one dimension or one dimensional type of objective, and it may not fit. That is not a balanced perspective. So surrounding by people from different communities, that really helps. People who
Oh.
are not very literate, they're not like they didn't even go to college, but they can give you really important life perspective about
Mm.
family. They're very successful fathers.
And I feel like also Islam gives us a lot of tools to live a three-dimensional life, as you were saying, to not be just good in one dimension, to kind of force ourselves to like take a step back and adopt a more sustainable lifestyle. So I don't know if you have anything, to add to that.
Well, I think it gives this you are not only bounded in this life. There is
Mm.
something that continues way beyond this life, and probably that's more important. So how you reach that, like, one of the biggest concern in my mind is raising my children. It's not just giving them the best education, sending to the best schools. That's not the only thing that reaches that goal.
Right.
So definitely that brings in a very interesting balance perspective, way beyond what is projected as one-dimensional, what they call one-dimensional measures of success, metrics of success in our society.
Mm. Okay, thank you. So we are unfortunately almost out of time, but I do want to, of course, ask you, what is your final piece of advice for our listeners? If there is one thing that you want them to take away from this show, what would it be?
So I think one metrics that define your future, wherever you end up, whether in academia or outside of academia, I really like this concept of resilience. Be
Mm.
resilient. In a sense, resilience means you're going to get the punches, but you still stand up.
Right.
And the route to success, however you define it, becoming a successful parent or successful businessman, academics, doctors, it is, they're going to be difficult routes. So you're going to fall and you're going to stand up on your knees.
Mm.
Resilience means expecting that the life is gonna put you through a lot, put you a lot of challenges, and welcoming those challenges. Challenges are opportunity to learn and grow. Without challenges, you cannot grow. Without challenges, you cannot step outside of your comfort zone. And what you need is just being resilient and welcoming those challenges. That's what I've learned hard way in my life, and I think that's what I want to get across
Mm.
to folks in this video.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Jerry, for all of your advice. I'm sure um, our viewers will find it very interesting. And if they want to reach out to you, maybe they heard something interesting in the show. Where would you suggest that they contact you?
So, absolutely, like my email address. I'm sorry, it's my last name at unc.edu.
Okay, so Jarrahi at unc.edu.
Jarrahi at unc.edu. You can the same if you just that's my domain jarrahi.com. You can find exactly that's
Hmm.
you can find my contact information. I'd be happy to chat more about these topics.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show and for your time,
Thank you so much, Imran.
of course. And thank you to all our listeners for listening. Remember, you can always catch our previous episodes on all the platforms, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, her website. I think that's all of them. And we hope that you will join us again next week for another show. And as Professor Jarrahi said, if you have any questions, you can reach out to him at his email, or you can visit his website. Umoja Outreach Foundation, uniting and empowering the Shia community.